speak on my list, a representative of Human Rights Watch.
Thank you, Mr. President. The World Conference on Human Rights reaffirmed the obligation of all states to ensure that persons belonging to minorities can fully exercise all their fundamental human rights. It is the responsibility of governments to provide security for all citizens, regardless of their ethnicity. Human Rights Watch strongly condemns acts of violence committed against minority groups, exercising their right to peaceful dissent, and governments' forceful suppression of these movements, the likes of which we have seen on our television screens in recent weeks. Decades of repressive policies imposed on such groups lead to the kinds of situations we are witnessing today. Some minorities have systematically been denied basic freedoms such as assembly, association, expression, and religious practice. Strictly controlling access to and information about areas where minorities live has been key to some governments' ability to silence dissent there. Human Rights Watch calls on such governments to immediately and unconditionally release those arbitrarily detained during protests and provide proper treatment for those in custody. To fully respect minority groups' freedom of expression, assembly and association, which are guaranteed under their domestic law and under international law. Ensure access by journalists and other independent monitors to regions where minorities live in order to report freely on what takes place there. Allow independent investigation into recent crackdowns of peaceful protests by minorities by credible international organizations such as OHCHR. Mr. President, no country can be considered a member in good standing of this Council if it violently suppresses the rights of minorities. Human Rights Watch is also gravely concerned by repression of minorities in exile who are prevented from demonstrating peacefully. The Vienna Declaration identified the protection of human rights as a legitimate concern of the international community as a whole. Mr. President, it is legitimate to raise concerns about the way in which the spirit of the Vienna Declaration is violated in specific countries in this Council, including in China. China has repressed freedom of speech in Tibet. It should not be allowed to do so in this Council.
Thank you. This is the end of this debate. Thank you. That's the end of the debate of this item of the agenda. I would like to inform the Council that we have a request for a right of reply, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished delegation of China. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, the Chinese delegation categorically rejects the willful interference in other countries' internal affairs by the EU, Switzerland, the US, Australia, and other countries, in total disregard of basic facts. With regard to their irresponsible remarks, my delegation deems it necessary to highlight the following 3 points. Firstly, the criminal acts of violence by a tiny number of people in some parts of China were by no means the so-called peaceful demonstrations. The rioters totally disregarded the fundamental human rights of the people by committing serious violent crimes of beating, smashing, looting, and arson. They resorted to extremely cruel and appalling means, even stabbed or burned to death 18 innocent civilians. Hundreds of residential houses and public buildings were set on fire. The lives and property of the people were seriously endangered and normal social order disturbed. Ample evidence shows that these incidents have been organized, premeditated, masterminded, and instigated by the Dalai clique and perpetrated by separatist forces of Tibet independence, both in and outside China, acting in collusion. This has once again exposed the separatist nature of the Dalai clique and the hypocrisy and deception of their claimed peace and nonviolence. Secondly, the irresponsible allegations by the EU and some other countries are totally groundless. They are not at all concerned with human rights. The incidents in Tibet took place in Tibet. With regard to these events, no responsible government would sit by indifferently. the Chinese law enforcement personnel exercised extreme restraint in handling the situation. No lethal weapons were carried or used. They carried out their duties in strict accordance with the law and with civility, fully compatible with international practices. However, these countries, having taken draconian measures to deal with violent conflicts within their own territories, are now accusing another countries taking necessary lawful measures. In fact, they are conniving at the wanton violation of human rights by rioters. Their remarks are a sheer distortion of facts by confusing the right and the wrong, which manifests their undisguised double standards. Here, I would like to remind the Swiss delegate that what you should do is to honor in earnest your commitments under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. I would also like to remind the US delegates that you should reflect on your record of massive violation of human rights in Iraq and other places in the world. One may ask, what other country in the world dares to violate human rights so blatantly? Thirdly, the Tibet issue is solely China's internal affair. It falls outside the purview of the Council, as the violent crimes engineered by the Dalai clique have seriously endangered the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of China. The Chinese government's lawful and appropriate handling of the situation has nothing to do with the work of the Council. The Chinese government is fully able to handle well its own affairs, to maintain social stability, and to safeguard the fundamental interests of the people of all ethnic groups in Tibet. We hope that the above-mentioned countries and some NGOs will respect facts, tell right from wrong, and make joint efforts with the international community to stop the criminal acts of violation of the Dalai clique. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you. I will urge members of the Council to fully respect also the atmosphere of the works of this Council. This is a session of a human rights body. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this will bring us to the end of our consideration of item 8. Taking into account that we have a very small number of minutes left of our work today, I would suggest that we stop here and resume our work tomorrow morning with item 9 and the rest of the program. I would like to thank you for your effort today and wish you an inspiring evening for better feelings tomorrow. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.